live for y'all. Dope. So now that we kind of are jumping in like full force into kind of the React ecosystem, right? We're getting more familiar with a lot of the main concepts of React. And at this point, we've been able to build some really cool apps. So I'm gonna just pull one up while we're sitting and thinking. We've been able to build a lot of the React applications that are kind of just easy to understand from the from like, oh yeah, we have components, and those components are essentially responsible for showing us some output on the screen, right? And like what we've been building so far have been single page applications that essentially do a lot of complicated things, but everything's always in one screen, right? One kind of format. So when this app finally loads and pulls up, we'll kind of see a better example. But everything we've talked about so far is like all you really need to know with relationship to building out React applications of your own, right? So the majority of the work that we put into this, right, is like learning about the elements, learning about the ways in which we render components, learning about how we pass data from component to component. And all of that then allows us to build applications like this that are one page, but then do some fair share of different things, interesting things with the data, right? But what happens when we want to build applications that are multiple pages, right? That, you know, instead of it just having one experience, right? There's multiple experiences and multiple pages of content that can show up, right? Well, there's a very popular library that we use in React that's for the purpose of routing, right? When you're building an HTML website out, you need to create what's called routes to allow for different pages essentially to come up on your website, right? And so React, being the friendly JavaScript tool that it is, makes it easier for us to get that process started without having to create multiple HTML files to have represent our different parts of our application. So the popular library that we make use of in order to do routing in React is called React Router. And it's a package that you can install using Node that allows for you to bring in some code, some JavaScript code that makes it easier for you to define what are called routes in your application and give your app the routing logic that you need to navigate to different pages and show different components essentially based on the context of the page. So React Router is a super popular library. So today I just want to talk through it and kind of show y'all the installation process and maybe add it to this app that we already have so that you can kind of see it in a live context and how it really works, right? So yeah, we're just gonna follow the doc. So we're going to reactrouter.com. They just recently launched version 6. So some resources you might find online about it might be out of date. Just make sure they're using v6. So you're making use of like the most up-to-date information about the library. Because yeah, most React apps are using this behind the scenes to handle their routing logic. So cool. So React Router is a very user-friendly, I would say, kind of set of a library. And the library essentially is JavaScript code that people are creating and making available to other developers to use. The majority of JavaScript libraries allow for you to install them into your application using Node or some package manager kind of like Node, right? We use the npm install command in order to install new libraries, right? And npm, right? We've talked about npm before, but Node and npm are two very important parts of like working with JavaScript. And well, I shouldn't go to Node, but like, you know, Node is the runtime engine that we download so that we can run JavaScript on our terminal. But npm is the package manager that comes pre-built into Node, where you can basically interact with other packages that developers have made in JavaScript that you can then bring into your application, right? So a lot of folks might have heard about like things like open source community and And a lot of what open source is about is like creating software that is available to other people to use, right? Whether it's like completely available for free and no strings attached, or it's available, but you have to put a license to it. The nuances that are there, but at the end of the day, the idea though is that there's all types of libraries that you can utilize in order to make your life easier when with relationship to like using JavaScript. And one of the things that is pretty difficult to handle clearly is routing, right? So if you just type route, if you type routing in like a in the search bar at npm, you'll come back with a bunch of different code repositories related to that, right? Clearly React Router is, well, React Router are these two here, but React Router DOM is the one we're going to be utilizing in a few minutes. But you can see just how many routers are created, right? And people are creating these different libraries for folks to be able to, well, I should say packages. People are creating these different packages for other developers to utilize in their applications in unique ways. The one we're going to use is React Router DOM, but it's good to know that in NPM, right, every package on NPM has its own page that you can read about the particular package that you're going to be installing. You can see how many people have been using it just this week alone. The license that it has, MIT license, means that it is free to use and it doesn't require you to have to like pay for a license in any way. So MIT is normally like the standard for like real talk free sort of software. You also can see the total files. So there's 18 files that get included with this repository of code. And every package is pointing to a repository of code on GitHub. So somebody made a GitHub repository that they knew they were going to make open to the public. And they added this repository into NPM as a package that now we can install for ourselves. By utilizing NPM and installing that package, what we're essentially going to do is pull the code from that repository that they have, and it will allow us to import that code into our JavaScript application, much like we import our own files when we have been working on our own kind of applications as well. So we're going to be making use of the React Router DOM library, but this idea of using packages goes way beyond just routing. And there's packages for all types of stuff that can make your life easier in your JavaScript development. But today we're talking about routing, right? So first thing we want to do is kind of follow the installation steps that the React Router docs suggest. So they want us to just install React Router DOM. And they very specifically say @6 to just make sure that we're installing the latest version. So I'm just going to copy this, and then inside of the terminal, I'm just going to, in a new tab, make sure that I run npm install. Well, I'm like, I want to do this. So let's do this. Let's do this in a new project so that y'all don't see, so that y'all can see how it works just for its, just in its own, and then we'll bring it into this project that we have here. So I'm just going to create a new React app real quick. And while that loads, while that loads, let's just talk a little bit more about what is going on in like React in the React Router library, right? So so React Router essentially is a very like interesting kind of package, because what it does is it allows us to define routes for our application to utilize as a system for essentially routing and navigating the user to specific components when they are going to specific paths. So the idea is really simple, right? Like on the browser, there's always a path that you're following with your URL, right? So if the user is going to the default path of like, whatever.com, the default path is represented with this /, right? But your users might be going to all types of different paths. And the idea is that rather than just return one component, like the app component that just has everything, and you can use React Router to define what might show up, what component should show up based on the particular path that somebody's visiting. Well, if you think about it, like that just sounds like a little bit of conditional rendering, which in essence is what's going on, but it's a lot more sophisticated in the way that it goes about determining what to show up and keeping track of like what pages have you seen and the history of all the pages that you've seen and components that you're showing. And that's what makes the React Router package so helpful, right? Is it does a lot of the logic for you. And it's a pretty simple interface to add into your React applications. So let's just take a look and see where the terminal is at. What is this talking about? Okay, well, it's trying to be OD with me today. But I guess it's working. One of the cool things about the React Router library is they have a really dope tutorial. So if you do want to follow like a really interesting tutorial related to the process, they speak you through like how to use how to add React Router into like your own application in this very simple sense here. But what we're going to do is kind of follow like some of what it's going to talk about here, but they talk about all of the concepts in this tutorial. But for us, we're just going to kind of do the main concepts to get the ball rolling in general. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just make sure you install React Router and install it into an existing React application. So this one is still finishing. So once it finishes, we'll install React Router, and then we'll start talking about these main concepts, get them kind of installed, bringing them into our components, and then start seeing how it works in a simple sense. And I think y'all will be kind of pleasantly surprised to see that it's relatively simple to use. It doesn't really require too much complicated work. So yeah, we'll wait for this real quick. I'll stop this server while this is doing its thing. And yeah. Nice. Okay. Yeah, I apologize, y'all. My computer be computing. So it might take a second. Cool. So now that I got this nice React project, right? Well, before I want to start the server, right? Because when you start the server, you can't actually run any commands. So when you do want to install packages, you end up having to stop the server. So while the server is stopped, I'm just going to make sure I go into the directory, but I'm going to do the npm install react-router-dom at 6. And this npm install command is going to go to React Router DOM, find that particular package that we were just talking about, and then download the code that's tied to this repository. The repository has all types of stuff inside of it, but the majority of the package will come in from the repository and then be added to our code so that we can make use of it in our application. So finished doing that. So I'm going to first open it in VS Code, and then I'm gonna just start the server so that I gotta get 2 birds knocked out with 1 code. Cool. All right, nice. So super simple default React application, right? Source folder has all those typical components, app.js, and yeah, kind of we got our boilerplate going on here. So now this is going to just refresh with that new app that we're starting. So we should see the app landing screen kind of pull up in a second. But yeah, we're going to walk through and talk through like some of the more important parts of utilizing React Router and get it kind of working in our application. So there's 3 important elements that we need to be able, that we make use of in order to get React Router set up. Like the setup part is pretty simple with 3 particular elements. So we have our app.js, right? And so we're going to leave this here for now. But let's say we want to make our app kind of move to a couple different components. So I'm just going to create a new folder inside of the app, inside of the source. I'm going to call it components. And then inside of the components folder, I'm going to have a couple files. So let's just say welcome.js, and let's say file, let's say let's say something like dashboard.js or something. Okay, cool. And so just in these components real quick, I'll just make a really super simple function. So I'm gonna just do const welcome smiley face. This is just gonna return a div, and it's just gonna say welcome. Export it. Nice. Copy this because I'm about to do something very similar here. Call it the dashboard. Nice. And then we have our app, right? So in a typical app, right, you use the app.js to kind of show all the source code that you want to use. In the React Router space, if you're using it with a React application, especially create React app, it's very typical that your app is going to actually change purposes to be less related to showing this information and more related to configuring your application's routes to show the code conditionally based on the route that's going in. So in order to do this, right, there's 3 smallish steps that we have to do. The first step is we have to make use of a particular item in the React Router library called the browser router. Now, the browser router is essentially like a wrapper that sits over our entire application and allows for us to define routes. So all you have to do really is, in essence, is wrap your application, right, with the browser router component that is pre-built into React Router, the React Router library. Typically, you'll see people do this one of 2 ways. So I'll show you both ways. The first way is inside of the index.js, which is where we define the app, right, that is going to be rendered, right? Remember, we don't really touch the index.js too much, but sometimes you do when you're about to when you're creating a component that is supposed to wrap the entire app, which by wrapping the entire app, it just means that the app would be a child of the new component you're rendering, and that way you can pass certain information into the app from that parent component, right? Because that's what props do. So React Router is no different, right? We have access to a couple of different particular components that we can utilize using React Router. So first way that you'll see people define their applications out is they will import browser router from React Router DOM, right? And this is the component that we utilize to wrap our application in order to create the ability for it to know about to know about navigation. So I'm just gonna do it here real quick. And the key thing here is that the app needs to be nested inside of the browser router tag, kind of like this. So this is the first way that you'll see people do this, is like wrap the browser router around the app inside of the index.js, right? The second way that you'll see people do it is instead of doing it in the index.js, they'll wrap the app with the browser router from inside of the app.js component. So inside of the app.js, they'll import the browser router, and then inside, they're not going to use any code for the most part. Maybe I'll save this for later though, so that I can make use of it. So let's do this. Right. And inside of the app, what they would do first is make sure that the app is returning returning the browser router, which is supposed to be our main component that gets returned from the app. So sometimes you'll see people do it wrapping the app with browser router in the index.js. Sometimes you'll see people just using the browser router as the main element inside of the app, right? So that's step one. You need your browser router somewhere wrapping your app, whether it's wrapping all the components you're going to return from the app, or whether it's wrapping the app component itself from the index.js. Is kind of up to you. But you need the browser router defined. And so then after you have the browser router defined, that's step one. The second step is you need to also bring in what's called a router, which is kind of funnily named in relationship to browser router. Like, what's the difference between browser router and router? Browser router is essentially a part of the package that determines that the routing you're going to be using is going to be for web browsers. So it makes sure that it's matching things for the URLs and stuff like that. There's other routers that React Router DOM allow you to, the React Router library lets you use, but the browser router is the one that comes pre-built with the features we need for managing routing on like in a web-based context. So the second part is a router. The router is the actual component that handles the logic of doing the routes that is related to the specific paths that are possible for the browser router to maneuver us to. So we need to bring in the router, and the router is just another component that kind of nests inside of it, the last component, which are each individual routes. So it's the route component is the last component, right? So we see that the way that this is going to work, we have our browser router. We're going to define the routes inside of the route element. So each route has a very unique, each route is very unique in that it gives us two really particular pieces of information. The first piece of information is that the path that particular route is corresponding to, and then the element, which would refer to what element should I show at this particular path, right? So I have these two components, welcome and dashboard. So I'm going to bring them in, just going to import them at the top from /components/ welcome. And I'm going to import dashboard from /components dashboard. And essentially, I'm just going to replace this with welcome. So I have my first route. And now that we've changed the app.js a little bit, let's save it and see now what's running on our React app over this way. Oh no, my table is broken. I think I was wondering if I needed to do this. Let's see, I might have to wrap this in. I think it might be this whole browser router from the app situation here. We got the welcome element. This is returning our div, and app is here, browser router, got our router, and the element being returned. Let's see if the app crashed or gave us any logic inside. Yeah, okay, my bad, y'all. Render a router, let's see. Can't render a router inside of another router. What are you talking about? My fault, y'all. Oh, my fault. That's my fault. So it's a typo. So basically the browser router is the main router for the application, and then essentially we have what's called the routes, and this was new in version 6. It used to be a switch statement, but essentially we have a routes component that is the thing that hosts all of the routes. So each individual route is inside of this routes element. So that's my bad. It's not called router. I should have just looked at the docs, but I was being stubborn. But here we see it. We got that welcome message coming back, right? But what's cool about this is now that we have the router kind of set up, we have our routes in each individual route. Now it's as simple as saying, okay, cool. Let's create a new route, right? And that new route will be to some new path, right? So we have our path for home, which is referenced by the slash. So the default space is going to be referred by the slash, and then any corresponding path will have its own unique kind of path, right? And we can give each path its own component to render. So now I have added a new path. So if I go to localhost / dashboard, I would expect for this to show me the dashboard, right? And then if I go back to the home, I'm going back to the welcome component, right? So very simple, but React Router then allows you now to render different components based on what path is the user looking at on your site, right? If you're thinking like me, you might be like, well, this is pretty cool, because now what this will allow you to do is build out the experiences that normally we see on the web, which are people going from one page to the next and seeing some unique information for themselves, right? So let's say, for instance, now I want to make this application a little bit more unique, right? So I'm thinking that, so I'm going to just kind of switch up these components just for the sake of like making some things more clear. So I'm just going to make this component called home. Just say welcome, thanks. Landing. A little spaceship, you know what I'm saying? People like spaceships. Cool. And so I'm just gonna save and rename this to be home, just so that got some clarity. And in doing that, I gotta swap it in the app.js, change it from welcome to home. Cool. And that's got that text there going. Now, rather than it just be this really boring div with the text, I'm just gonna also, first of all, push this up some. And inside of the div, I'm just gonna make this a H1 for the sake of making it a little bit easier on the eye. Cool. Bet. So got this nice little homepage, right? I might want to add some other Jawns to it. Like, you know, maybe I want to add an image, give it a source, and give it some alt text. You know, people like the work, so make this page a little nicer. So I'm just gonna go on Giphy real quick and just grab a GIF, and then just put that in the page as a sourced image. So let's say thumbs up. I'm gonna go with SpongeBob because I've been watching mad SpongeBob recently. I know that's a really interesting confession, but you know, I gotta let y'all know. So I'm gonna copy the image address. Just make sure that this is going to an image. All right, it's going to this media GIF. That might not actually work with the image tag. So let's see. I want the link. Okay, let's see if it works. But add this to the image, add my alt text, SpongeBob thumbs up. Hopefully it works, because you know what I'm saying, I just want that gift to show. Okay, thank God. All right, cool. So we good, we out here. So good. So we got our first page, our home page, and then on this another page, instead of this being kind of dashboard, let's just make this about me, about.js, and then in the app, change this to about, and change this element to about, and also I'll change this path to about as well. And so then cool. So we know now that if I go to, whoops, it says local, oh, my bad. Gotta switch the default export. And I'll do something similar here where I'll just put this div down some, and then inside of the div, maybe this will be another H1, and inside I'll say about me, and I'll put some paragraphs. I'll say like, this site is basic. I know that. You know that. But it's still worth checking out. Example, how to use, and then I'll just do a nice little anchor, href, router, website, all right, cool. Awesome. All right, so now we know with the, why is it doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? Return our about in the app got about, oh, my bad. Cool, so now we, just with the React router logic that we already know, right? Inside of the app, if I go to this particular path, I should go see my welcome component. That's clearly showing up. We got SpongeBob with the thumbs up on there. And then if I go to /about, I would expect to see my about page up there. So cool, there it is. And I got that nice little anchor to the React router. And I can always go back, right? So cool, this is as simple as it gets when it comes to React router and how it works. I mean, everything that you see in here is basically what we just talked about, right? You can define your browser router, define your routes, and in each route, choose what the path is going to be, as well as the particular element that shows up. Now, there's more interesting things that you can do with React router, like create specific routes for potentially like wildcard routes. So if you're expecting your user to type in some input in the route and you want to get that input as well, you can use some wildcard elements as well. And then the entire API will talk to you about a lot of the other things that it can do, right? So there's some examples for if you want to do some modal pop-ups with React router, that is possible. And yeah, the tutorial I think is really helpful in kind of showing you more of these more intermediate concepts in like an interesting way. So I'll leave that part to you, but let's just keep building out this application and kind of playing around with some of the other features of React router, right? So we talked about the most basic ones, the route, browser router, and the routes component. But now, right, we see that we have our welcome component, we got this about, but there's not really a good way to go between them. And currently, right? Because right now the user has to literally type out the URL, and that's cool. But it would be great if we had like a link or a way for the user to click a button or some kind and go from one page to the next. Well, just so happens that the React router library comes built in with the ability for us to do that, to create links. So there's two ways that you might be interested in, right? One is just the regular link element, which we're going to use in a second. And the other is the nav link element, which allows you to render more of a link purposefully built for like a nav bar. So if you wanted to make a nav bar, the nav link might be a better option. But link and nav link do similar things in that they allow you to link to a specific React router route. So let's say now on my app, right, inside of the homepage, I'm going to just create another opportunity for someone to learn about me. So first I got to import the link from React router DOM. And the link element is really simple. It's a component. You specify what path is it going to go to, and then you can put whatever you want inside of it. It basically creates like an anchor. So I'm going to just do the same. So I'm just going to say link, link, and I'm going to say about me, about this page or something. And then I'm going to say to, and I'm going to just say about. And then inside of the app, I got this nice, crazy situation here where this is not showing up the right way stylistically. But I guess what I can do is let's put this in another div for now. And move that up. And then inside of the link, so let's just see what this does first. Then, okay, at least it moves it down. But, if I don't want this link to just be just to the text, right, I can also add something around this so that it's a little easier for the user to see. So maybe I'll wrap this in a button or something. And inside of the button, the text of the button will be about this page. Whoops. So one thing you'll see with this example is that so technically I have this button, right? But I never set up an on click or anything. Because it's wrapped by a link, it automatically makes it so once you click this, it's gonna do the event for you, right? So that's one of the things that's kind of cool about the link element is you can wrap elements with a link, and that allows you then to navigate to the right places, right? So now we have the ability to navigate from one page to the next. If I want to kind of follow suit here, I can just very purposefully add. I could very purposely add kind of a similar thing to the bottom of the about page, right? So maybe here I could just at the end of the div, I could just put another div and I'll link all of that stuff back to the home. And of course, in order for this to work, I'm going to need to import the link from React router DOM. Cool. Nice. So now I can go back to the, whoops, that's my bad, y'all. I got to link this to home or to slash. So you can go back to the about page. Oh, it's not working. Interesting. Interesting. Well, it's not something you see every day. Oh, my bad. This is the wrong place. That's why this is. So this goes to about, and then this about page is supposed to go to slash. So one thing that you'll notice though, I'm at this weird route that clearly isn't the route that I want to be on, right? One thing you'll notice though is that because this is at a different route, React Router didn't crash the app, right? And it's not going to. If a user goes to a route that doesn't exist, they're going to kind of just be met with a page that doesn't exist. A way around this is another thing that built into the React Router library, which is handling essentially like if a user goes to the wrong route of some kind, right? So the idea is like, just like you have, so you have all of these different routes and paths and whatnot, but you might want to define a path for when the user goes to a page that doesn't exist, right? A 404 like page, for instance. And one thing to keep in mind is that the, I don't know if it talks about it inside of this specific section. The one thing to note about how React Router works is that the paths are really important, and the ordering of your paths are really important. So here's an example of kind of like a not found situation. So this is an example of like how we might handle this case where, you know, user goes to a path that doesn't exist. So we have our home, we might have our about page, and we might have a page for everything else, right? So star would represent like you come into a path that doesn't match. So the name of the path is important because the app is going to try to match whatever path it can match first with the URL. So first, clearly the slash is the first part of the URL. So this is why this is good for the home page. Anything that you're trying to use as a particular route, you're going to want to give it a name that makes sense. But something like the asterisk is a wild card. It's a built-in character in the React Router space to note all paths. So let's just add that real quick and take a look at it. And first, let's just also make sure that our app is working as we expected. Go to my about, and then go to home. Okay, cool. So now I might want to add like that, like, you know, not found 404 kind of page, right? So I'm gonna just add a new, route. And then I'm gonna give it a path with the asterisk to represent all the other paths that it can be. And then I'm gonna give it a new element, which I'm gonna make in a second, called 404.js. So I'm gonna say 404.js. And I'm worried that this component can't start with a number. Yeah, I'm worried about that. So let me just rename this now to, let's just say not found. All right, cool. And so here, similarly, I'm just gonna create a little component, const not found, and I'm gonna just return. I'm gonna return a another div with a h1. Sorry, that page doesn't exist. Put an actual emoji because I'm lit like that. We're still happy crying. And put, just for the sake of the user experience, put another kind of link to back to home kind of thing. Cool. So I'll export it. so that we can bring it into the rest of the application. So I'll save this. And then inside of the app, I'm going to put that element for not found. And make sure I close this route. And then make sure I also bring it in to the, I import it at the top. So import not found from /component/not found. Cool. And that's as simple as it is when it comes to working with the React router, right? So now we should be able to go to the about page, go back to the home page. And then if I type anything random, it'll take us to the sorry, that page doesn't exist, and I can go back to the home. So dope. So like essentially a basic kind of navigation flow that would be relatively common, right? Is like you kind of have pages that you're meant to see, and then pages that if you go to an error, you know, you kind of can do that. And these are all of the basic features of React Router. And so with this, what this allows you to do now is you can take all the logic that we've talked about with React and our components and create pages, right? Create an application or a website that actually has pages in that structure to it, so that you can create interactive, you can make your websites more designed in a way, in a format that is relevant to how you might expect these things to be commonly kind of created. So just as a recap, right? 3 steps you got to do in order to get your React router set up. First you install the React Router DOM library, right? Second, once you install it and you have it inside of your React app, you have to use a browser router to wrap your application. 2 places, one plan, sometimes you'll see people do their browser router part in the index.js, but most times, you know, you'll also see people just putting it at the top of the app and making it so that the app no longer returns any visual elements, but it returns the browser router and then the other 2 components we need from React Router, which is the routes component and the route component. Routes basically just nest all of our routes. Sorry for that. I didn't, no pun intended. But we use this routes component as a parent component for every individual route component that we create. Each route component uses a particular path and returns a specific element. There might be cases where, given the way that your paths are, structured, right? It's going to try to match the paths in a way that is, it's going to try to match your paths in a way that is, how do I say this? It tries to match your paths by how you name your paths, right? So in the case of, so one of the things that was a big thing with React Router was that sometimes you have paths that kind of have similar names, right? One thing to note is that there's other pieces to the React Router library that you can use to make it so that, for instance, if I want to make sure that this only will go to this path, if this path is completely just this, you can use something like the exact keyword, which is a keyword that you can pass in to make it so that this route will only go to the about page if that page is strictly called about, right? So these are just things to keep in mind, that there's other elements to the React Router package that are really interesting, right? So like some of those other ones that are worth talking about, right? Well, we talked about the link and the nav link. So sometimes you might want to have like actual, you might want to have actual kind of sub content or like sub routes inside of an application. So it's easy to do that using the React Router library. So you can have routers within routers, but, or you can have routes within, you can have multiple routes within routers. So you can have different sections kind of using the routing logic that comes with React Router. So that is like, that's possible. In the tutorial, I think they show you kind of they show you about this idea of nested routes and how you can really kind of create like a real nav bar kind of scenario and pass data from your app. But as you can see, step one, wrap your app with the browser router, add some links. So they started off by just adding some link elements and then adding the routes eventually to the, so they created a couple new components and then rendered the routes with each element. Then with nested routes, which is what I was talking about, right? There might be certain scenarios where you want to have one route, right? Like this route for home that then is routing to, that might route to these other routes based on something specific. So if you wanted somebody to go to so it would basically require them to go to this path plus this path in order to see this element, or this path plus this path to see this element. So nested routes are pretty important because sometimes you might want to have that element, that kind of design to your navigation setup. And then beyond that, there's all types of other ways that you can use React Router to like pass data around, or to also kind of just pass data into your route as a specific kind of data point that might be utilized for the for your route itself. So there's really interesting kind of ways that you can use React Router to create more robust routing logic for you and your application. So I'm gonna pause on this and just kind of see if there's any questions, but also if there's not, if this is all making sense, which hopefully it is, just give me a thumbs up so I know that you're rocking. Nice, appreciate y'all. Okay, cool. I appreciate that so much. All right, so yeah, so I would definitely take some time to read the React Router tutorial. It's really helpful with things like these, like kind of routes with data that's passing in. And at the same time, it'll give you some more practice so that you can take what we're talking about right now and add it to like more logical things for yourself. But when you start thinking about, hey, I want to build a React app and I wanted to do some more complicated things with relationship to going from one component to another component in like a page-like setup, React Router is one of the best libraries for routing, and it's one of the most popular. As you saw before, it has like 8 million weekly downloads. This is how many people downloaded it this week. We were one of them. So I definitely stand by it. It's they also, when you think about packages to use, you want to use packages that are well maintained, right? Packages that, clearly people are using it are good to know, because if people are using it, that means there's a lot of support, as well as like, when are people publishing changes? Like how often are they publishing changes is also really something important to see. But yeah, there's so much more to explore, but I hope that this little entry to like React Router helps you so that you can start building like React applications that have multiple pages and utilize some of the same principles of components, state, props that we've talked about before, but in more kind of traditional web interface like settings. So that is it.